Hi guys, it's Joy. I'm back with another project with Joy Clair Designs. Doing something a little different for me. I'm using an ink smushed background and watercolor. So completely different for me, and I had no idea actually that I could do one of the techniques. So my project is featuring the Truly Inspired digital stamp set, which includes 2 images and 4 encouraging sentiments. Now, what I'm talking about that I didn't know you could do. So, I made a background first, and I put it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of watercolor paper, and I did it on the smooth side because I knew that I was going to print it with my laser printer. And it was truly an experiment, but I was pretty encouraged that I could do it because I put heavy cardstock through my printer all the time. So anyway, it makes for some really cool projects, and I'm excited to share this with you. So, like I said, I started out with my background, and I used the colors Abandoned Coral, Kitsch Flamingo, and Picked Raspberry in the Distress ink line. And I ink smushed it, and I went back and forth several times. And I am using a rubber placemat. And I do that, it's kind of like a silicone craft mat. That's what I had. So anyway, so when I first put it down, I got the really cool harsh bubbles, and that kind of came up. So then I wanted to preserve that texture, knowing that I was working on watercolor paper. So I dried that in between, and then each time I layered it, I dried in between, just because that gives you the best preservation. Then I ran that through my printer, and I broke out my Karen markers. I bought these things maybe a year ago, and I've used them maybe 5 times, which has no indication that they're bad markers. They're absolutely fabulous. I'm just not very good with watercolor, so I am really stretching my abilities today, which I think is really good to do as a crafter. I learned Copics. I spent a whole lot of money learning Copics, and I kind of leaned to it. So I broke out the current Karen markers, and I used the 5 colors, magenta, red, gold, red, and rose pink. Looking back on it, I probably didn't need to use the magenta red, just because I've got the red and a magenta in there, and with the watercolor it would have blended just fine. So I went in and I kind of put in where my shadows would be, and then I used a paintbrush. I think it was a number 4, maybe. And I just spread the color out with the water and just kept dropping my colors in. I went between using a dry technique, which is where you put your marker down first, and then using your brush to spread the water. And I dried multiple times in between. But there were times that I also put my water down first and then just dropped the color in. And that's what I like about these Karen markers, that they are super pigmented. So you can go either paper, straight to paper, or you can drop into the water. You can even lay them down on a mat and you can ink smush with them. I just wanted to use my Distress inks because I knew that they were super juicy, and I kind of wanted to preserve my markers. I'm not going to lie. But that's kind of what I did. So I'm going to back up a little bit on my process while you watch the color. Since I did my entire background on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that I had cut down, I printed my image out 4 times. So what I do is I size my images in Adobe Photoshop Elements, and then I on a project that's like 4 by 5.25, and then I drop it into Word document because I find that it's easier to space your like 4 images on a page doing that. So I technically got 4 cards out of this project. I'm only showing 1 because it would have been repetitive, and I did the exact same thing for all 4. I liked having, a stash so that I can send them out. I send out, I don't know, like 50 cards a month. So that's kind of what I did. Then I also printed the sentiment from the same stamp set onto smooth cardstock, and I die cut that using an Art Impressions double stitched rectangle dies on just with white paper. And then as I was getting ready to create my whole card, I realized that I didn't do the greenery. So I used a YG01 and a 03 Copic just because I knew that they would blend well with a dye ink like Karen markers. And because I used the YG, it didn't create mud. And then from there, I cut my panel down and I adhered that to a brushed gold matte, and then adhered it to a black card base, side folding A2 card base. And then I popped up that sentiment with some squares, and I drew in some little brackets just to add a little bit of attention to it. And then I got my Barely Art glue out again and some sequin mix from HAI Supply. I just used the black ones, different sizes, and scattered those around just because I felt like I needed a little bit more interest, but I didn't want anything to take away from all the ink blending and the watercolor. I just wanted a very ethereal look to it, and I think I achieved that. And then again, to finish off my card, I did place a white mat inside since I used a black base, and that's really it. So I encourage you to check out Joy Clair Designs, and I would ask you to consider subscribing. Have a good one. Thank you so much.